In this video, I'm going to be covering how to make a scatter plot either with no line or with a linear trend line. And so I just want to remind you before I get started that I am using Microsoft Excel 2010, which may be slightly different on your computer depending on which version of Microsoft Office that you have, but it's always the same basic idea and the names of the tools are the same. If you ever are not sure where to find something, look up your version of Excel and Google it, and you will usually find really helpful stuff about your specific version of Excel. So again, I'm using Excel 2010, but it's going to be really similar no matter what your version of Excel is. So I'm going to start with a scatter plot that has no connecting lines, and this is like one of the graphs that you did in Lab 1. If you remember back, you graphed player height versus player score, and this kind of data is data that you would not want to have connecting lines between because every player is just a distinct individual, and there's no relationship between player 1's height and player 2's height, and so you don't want to connect the line. Connect the dots with a line. So let me show you how to do that. So I've put x-axis data in the left column, and I've put y-axis data in the right column. I'm going to highlight that data, then go to Insert, choose Scatter, and when I click on that, it's going to give me a couple choices. Remember, I don't want a line connecting them, so I'm going to click on Scatter with only markers. And again, you can kind of see the little picture there to help you, showing you that there's no line. So I click on that, and it generates a graph. Again, graphing player height on the x-axis, player score on the y-axis, with distinct dots for each player, distinct points for each player, and no line connecting them. Now I still need to add titles and axis labels. So remember, you click on your graph. So if you click off of it, you don't have this option. If you click on it, you get more options. Go to Chart Layout, and then choose Axis Titles. So I want a horizontal, that's your x-axis, and I'm going to type in the title. In this case, that's player height, and don't forget to put in your units, inches, and there's that one. And then again, I go back to axis titles, and I want a vertical one as well, so I choose a rotated title, and in this case that's player score, and again, don't forget your units, points. And then last thing I need on this graph is a title, so center overlay title, and I'm going to do player height versus player score. And now I've got a complete graph. And remember that I can take a graph like this and right-click, can take a graph and I can copy, use Control-C or right-click and copy, however you want to do it. And then you can take a Word document, and I'll just paste down here, and you can right-click and you can paste. So that's what you're going to do for your lab report. Okay, so I'm going to delete that before I forget to do that. All right, so I'm going back to my workbook. And so now I want to show you how to make a scatter plot with a trend line. So a scatter plot with a trend line is going to make data points, just like this one, but then it's going to put a quote-unquote best fit line between those data points. So instead of just simply connecting the dots, however the order of the dots is, it creates some sort of line that doesn't necessarily connect the dots, but shows a relationship between the dots. We're going to focus on a linear relationship because that's the kind of relationship we have between the data points in Lab 5. And so a linear relationship, if you remember back to your math, is a y equals mx plus b relationship. And so that's going to create a straight line. So let me show you what this is going to look like, and don't forget to see the Word file for a more detailed explanation of a trend line. So I've got my data on the left, that's concentration. I've got weight change on the right, that's my y-axis data. Again, I'm just going to highlight that data, go to Insert, And I'm going to start by just choosing scatter, and again, no line, okay? So I'm not connecting those dots. So scatter with only markers, I click on that, and it creates the graph. And just take a look for a second here. Notice that the dots don't perfectly line up into a straight line, right? That's normal due to random variation in the data. So there's nothing wrong with this data. It's just that due to random chance, we get slight variation in the data. We know that it should be a straight line, theoretically. In a theoretical world, it would be a straight line. So that's that linear relationship that I was talking about. So in order to put a straight line between those dots, I can't just connect the dots. I have to do something called add a trend line, also called a best fit line, because it's going to try and find the best fit to make a straight line between these dots. So in order to do that, I'm going to click on the dots. So notice that it's highlighted the points, okay? Then I'm going to right click, and one of the options that it gives me when I'm clicked on those dots is add a trend line. So I'm going to choose that option, and when I choose that option, it gives me some choices. And so in some cases, you would have different kinds of relationships between the data, okay? And that would depend on, again, the mathematics of the particular data that you're plotting. For our intents and purposes, we just want a basic linear relationship. And so I choose linear, and then I can close this, and look at that. A trend line has appeared between my data points. So again, notice it's not connecting the dots, right? It's making the best fit between the dots that makes a perfectly straight line and shows that linear relationship, okay? Once I have my trend line, then I go and look for where that trend line crosses 0%. So, I haven't added my labels yet. So before I explain this, let me go in and add my labels. So one more time, I click on my graph. And remember, if I'm clicked off of it, I don't get these choices. Click on my graph, go to Layout, go to Axis Titles, so horizontal one, and in this case, that is the concentration, whoops, and that's in molarity. Okay, and then I need my vertical title, and that in this case is percent weight change. All right, and then last thing, I need to click on my chart to get that tool back, is my title. And the title here is going to be concentration versus percent weight change. And I did my experiment in apples instead of potatoes, okay? You use potatoes, but then mine's an apple one. Okay, so let me hit return there. So now I've got my title. So let me just move that a little bit, because you can move your titles around just like text boxes, just so it's not covering my line. Okay, so now that we have our data labels, this will hopefully help with the explanation a little bit. So with my trend line, I'm looking for the place where it crosses 0% weight change, because 0% weight change would be the isotonic concentration. So here's 0 over here for weight change, and my line crosses 0 weight change at around 1.1 molarity. So looking at my values for concentration, this is 1.1 molarity. So my trend line shows me that for my apples, the isotonic concentration is 1.1 molarity. So that's how you make scatter plots, either without a line or with a trend line. And again, you're going to need to make a trend line for your potato experiment in order to figure out what the isotonic concentration of potatoes are.